Manufacturing Matters is an MFG Radio Network production brought to you by GIE Media's Manufacturing Group as industry experts take deep dives into the latest manufacturing matters, whether it's new innovations, products, technologies, and emerging markets that help you understand better why manufacturing matters to you and also to the top companies in the medical, aerospace, defense, and electric vehicle manufacturing industries. Hello, I'm Jake Kaufman, the senior editor for GIE Media's Manufacturing Group of magazines, and we want to welcome you to our latest discussion, Supply Chain Smoothing Out or Something Else, with Lisa Anderson. Any company's performance is only as strong as the weakest link in their supply chain. So Lisa Anderson, the founder of LMA Consulting, lays out what to expect as we head into 2026. Before we get started today, though, we do want to thank our 2025 series sponsor, Kennametal. Kennametal has been cutting metal since 1938. It's a story of continuous innovation, starting with the development of revolutionary tungsten titanium carbide alloy cutting tools specifically for working with steel. This not only led to a new class of machining tools that cut faster, lasted longer, and drove productivity in everything from automobile to the airplane, but also to Kennametal's recognition as an industry leader across continents and industries, including transportation, construction, aerospace and defense, medical, general engineering, and more. They don't cut corners, they cut metal, and your toughest materials don't stand a chance. You can find out more at kennametal.com. We'd also like to thank SMW Autoblock. SMW Autoblock is a work holding company focused on achieving customer goals and expectations with the highest quality products and services. SMW Autoblock combines stocked standard product with a highly trained sales, service, and engineering team to consistently provide the ideal work holding solutions for customers across a wide range of industries. Today's presenter is Lisa Anderson, the founder and president of MLA Consulting Group, specializing in manufacturing strategy and end-to-end supply chain transformation. A recognized supply chain thought leader, Lisa has been named a top 40 B2B tech influencer, a top 16 ERP expert to follow, among the top 10 women in supply chain, and in the top 55 supply chain and logistics experts, and a woman leader in the supply chain. But without any further ado, Lisa, thank you so much for your time and expertise. The floor is all yours.
Excellent. Well, glad to be here, and we have certainly a compelling topic in terms of supply chain. Is it smoothing out or something else? So we will talk about that, and feel free to put your questions in the send your questions so that we can answer those along the way. So supply chains have gone from being simple in the old days, 20 years ago is now the old days, but has gone from being simple to really being global, which has exploded and exposed risk and complexity into the supply chains, which became apparent during COVID, as we discovered very quickly that supply chains don't just continue. So, it's now the question is, what are we going to do from here? So we'll start and talk about a lot of the risks that are going on. The risks going on in the supply chain, and then we'll go back to, where do we go from here and how do we mitigate these risks? So one of probably the largest risk going on in the supply chain right now, geopolitical risks are definitely heightened and elevated. So China is certainly the biggest of the challenges out there. From a mining and manufacturing standpoint, they have been dominating manufacturing since they entered the WTO. They have, the U.S.'s manufacturing line, and some of the other parts of the world as well, but it's really the U.S. Has gone directly down in terms of their manufacturing, and China has gone directly up. So crossing lines, if you will. So now they are 30% of the world's manufacturing output. However, as big as that sounds, they impact 80% of the world because manufacturing, will like move to other countries for finishing, etc. So basically 80% of the world they impact in terms of manufacturing. And then rare earths and active pharmaceutical ingredients, which are found in our medicines and pharmaceutical products. They have 71% of the global mined rare earths, and they dominate over 90%. I saw yesterday 91% of global refining and separating capacity, which basically means you have to be able to mine the rare earths and then refine them to basically to utilize rare earths. Now we'll talk more about rare earths, but what are they? I mean, rare earths are in essence the minerals required, critical minerals. Actually, rare earths are not rare, but it's just whether or not whether you're allowed, I guess to say, to mine them and refine them in your country. And then basically that takes significant amounts of time to put those practices in place if you aren't doing it currently. So in essence, they're used for like electronics, defense, so like aerospace and defense. They're used for all of our technology, AI, computer chips. So it's a big deal. Medical devices, pretty much it's hard to find anything that doesn't require rare earths, at least something that's critical to us. So that's very concerning. And then they control up to 80% of some part of the API supply chain. So in essence, they cut off rare earths, not pharmaceuticals at this point, but they cut off rare earths to the world during the tariff situation that's been going on. And they have started up, I mean, with the recent trade agreement, well, it's not an agreement yet, but discussions, they've started shipping most of the rare earths again. So it's a challenging topic. What you don't ever want to be in that position where 90% of your customers or your supply is located in one place that can and will just turn it off. And computer chips, they produce 60% of the world's computer chips. So China is a significant risk we should be paying attention to. Also, from a China point of view, they certainly believe in dominating supply chains. That's been their strategy. I mean, you don't have to think too hard to understand what's happening here when you know that they'll turn off rare earths, as an example. But they also believe they control the South China Seas, which obviously no one controls them, is supposed to control a sea, but they do believe that. And so that impacts 33 to 40% of global maritime trade. So again, if you can impact a trade route, it'll have a significant impact on goods flowing throughout the world. They also have been using the Belt and Road Initiative, which in essence is investing in other countries, which has some positive effects for those countries, obviously, but strategically to dominate the supply chains. Because if you read the fine print, you can, if they want to, pretty much, they can cut it off, is what's happening. And, cut off key infrastructure, like ports and different, energy, of course, rare earths. They're trying to look to control those types of things throughout Asia, Latin America, Europe. I mean, it's all over the place. And then trade restrictions, which we've discussed, and like under zero COVID policies, they were able to shut off production again, which is 30% for the world, and it impacts 80% of the world. So that's a significant risk. Taiwan is next up here. So Taiwan produces 90%. That, again, you don't ever want this to be true, but 90% of the world's advanced computer chips. So of course, what does that mean? Well, of course, anything for AI, anything advanced medically. I mean, all the things you'd want are going to be produced in Taiwan currently. And if you think about it, since China produces 60% of the rest of the computer chips, that's obviously part of the China aggression towards Taiwan. Because if you can control 90% of the advanced computer chips and 90% of the rare earths, you've got it made, right? So that's kind of the challenge here. And then there's talent, obviously, that relates back to manufacturing and the AI and advanced computer chips. So that's what's really going on here in terms of the aggression with Taiwan. And they face significant threats on a daily basis. Now, we'll get to some of the things we're doing. We're obviously not just sitting around twiddling our thumbs with all of this. Like, for example, and we recently just produced the first advanced computer chip in the US. So that's encouraging. I thought I'd throw that out there before making you too depressed. In the Middle East, there's also vulnerabilities and choke points. So like supply chain has become, a hot topic. I mean, you must cover it in your boardrooms if you want to make sure that you are successful. So the Suez Canal is a key choke point in the supply chain. 30% of the global shipping container volume flows through there. Quite a bit of certainly the volume going to Europe and going to the east coast of the U.S. It flows through there. So after the Israel-Hamas war broke out, well, thank goodness that's like trending towards peace here. But the Houthi rebels, which is also Iran-backed, started attacking ships in the Suez Canal. Obviously, we can't afford to have deaths and problems like that going on. So it means that they had to reroute ships, increase lead time, cost, obviously negative environmental impacts, etc. So it's, a significant impact on the global supply chain. For the U.S., there's other routes like the Panama Canal, which we'll get to soon, which also had some issues. So you have to be cognizant of what's going on around the globe. It also exposed some supply chain vulnerabilities, which you have to really be concerned about. So there was this story about exploding pagers targeting the Hezbollah, which is an Iran-backed group, operatives in Lebanon and Syria. So like, how did all these pagers start exploding? If you think about it, that's really concerning because like, who knows what electronics, or it doesn't have to be in electronics, but what could be implanted in everyday items, really, if that's what that exposed. So we have to be more sure about the security of our supply chains. And then cyber. So of course, there's like a lot going on with cyber. Some of it affects us directly, and some of it like we don't really realize is going on. But there's like some of the big ones were SolarWinds, which impacted 18,000 customers, including the US government and some private firms. There was CrowdStrike, which was like probably the one that's like most known like to a normal, like, well, I don't know if I say normal person, but like an everyday person. Because there was like, it was a massive IT outage. It affected airlines and other just affected a lot of places that probably have impacted everybody on this call. Salt Typhoon, maybe you have not heard about it, but it's significant. So it affected U.S. telecommunications and internet providers, very concerning. And then there's Volt Typhoon, which is Chinese state linked a group, and that has to do with infrastructure. Very, very, very important. Power, water, communications, everything that's needed, not just for survival, but also for manufacturing. So that's like quite concerning. If you think about it from, so I've been consulting now for 20 years. This is our 20th year anniversary. And I've had multiple clients that didn't have these attacks when I was working with them, thank goodness. But I've had multiple clients that have had cyber attacks and that they definitely impacted them significantly. And some of them were quite, medium, large size companies. So it's not, it's widespread, and it was devastating. They had to go manual, if you will, for a while, and then they had to build themselves back up. So it was a whole mess. So we came in afterwards to help them improve their service to their customers. And then there's also natural resources. I started talking about this, but natural resources are very critical for powering supply chains. Oil and natural gas is used somewhere in like every supply chain. I can't even think of one that doesn't, because obviously you can think about transportation and goods movement and it's going to involve energy. However, almost every manufacturing environment, I mean, it's got to be powered, right, by electricity. So that's involved and it's significant in, it depends on the type of manufacturing, but it's significant throughout manufacturing. And it's why, for example, China's been putting on a coal plant every single week. So that obviously makes you wonder as to whether or not like all these efforts to improve the environmental footprint make any difference whatsoever if China's, utilizing coal plants and not ones that are clean, clean energy to be sure. So anyway, oil and natural gas, the electrical grid poses a disruption. Actually, there's a client that's in California, a smaller manufacturer that's been shut down somewhat regularly because of the electrical grid issues. And so they've been preemptively shutting it down so it wouldn't cause fires. However, that's a significant problem. So you have to be thinking about, what you're going to do in these situations, where you're located, what the use of, what kind of energy do you have. And so water and energy, obviously power supply chains. So water is actually really quite key in manufacturing as well. It depends, of course, on what kind of a process, but like computer chips, they require water. There's a whole article I've written about water in China, another scary story, somewhat similar to the coal plant a week type of a thing. Of course, they're not going to do it in the same way that, the environmentally friendly way that we would do it in the US. So anyway, there's a lot of water that's required. So that's why there's some conflicts, like between India and China as an example, because there's waters between those two countries. And then there's commodities, rare earths. We talked about the rare earths. Commodities, came out with the Russia invasion of Ukraine, because Russia and Ukraine have commodities that are needed for all sorts of things, including medical devices and computers. I mean, pretty much everything that we need is globally sourced these days. So you have to be making sure you have some, if nothing else, backup sources of supply, but really that's no longer even close to enough. But we'll talk further about it, diversifying your supply chain. Food and fertilizer, and then artificial intelligence, has significant energy and electricity demands. It's going to grow at least 50% annually. I've seen statistics that are, multiples of that. It's significant. Of course, no one's going to want to give up the AI capabilities, not just for businesses, but, just ChatGPT as an example. None of us want to give it up. It's like giving up the internet. However, powering it is another story. So now we go on to supply chain risks. So, like I said, there'll be a lot of risk, but then we have to figure out, like, what are we going to do about all this? And there are successful paths forward. So, as I said, you might have moved your supply chain away from the Suez Canal with the Houthi rebels, but you know what? The Panama Canal is another option for getting products to the East Coast, and it had its own share of problems here. And these are weather events related problems, because the Panama Canal is a key choke point. They had a drought that caused the capacity to be cut by 50%. It also caused, of course, prices to rise because its capacity. And unrelated to that, but a definite issue going back to China is that they happen to control the terminals at each end of the Panama Canal. As I said, when you invest and if you control both sides of a canal, you can imagine what might happen if you get into a conflict. So that's a problem. And then they're also building a key bridge for the canal. So there's been some discussions about this and trying to get it diversified to BlackRock, but don't know. That hasn't been in the news lately, and there's still problems with that whole situation. And then there's additional weather related events. This is like a really good example, I think. Hurricane Helene um, caused a Baxter manufacturing facility that supplied 60% of the US dialysis solutions. So 60 is a lot less than 90, but it still caused havoc. So think about the 90. But anyways, the 60% dialysis solutions and IV fluids, like it caused shortages, like, lots of supply chain backups had to go into place. And, it was eventually resolved and they've gone back to production. But that was a big disruption. And then in Germany, some severe floods disrupted more than 25 suppliers across automotive, industrial machinery, chemicals, pharmaceuticals, and medical devices. So these kinds of things happen, and it's they've been happening over the years. The problem is that if we've consolidated our source of supply to a reliable, could be reliable, hopefully, good supplier that happens to be in a danger zone, or maybe just like 100-year flood zone, but then you get 100-year flood. That happened to a facility that I led prior to my consulting career as a VP of operations. And of course, wouldn't you know it, there was a new facility to us at the time. We had just bought the facility, and it was in a 100-year flood zone. They had a hurricane, and once you know, it was a disaster for the whole town. But the good news is that we had planned in advance and brought in some extra supplies. That it was like had some additional flood control mechanisms, so the building wasn't flooded. But operations had to stop. During that period of time, no one could get through or anything. So it's that can be significant. You have to plan for these things. And then there's also strikes, right? There hasn't been in the new, well, there's been Boeing strikes, UPS, FedEx, potential rail, port strikes. Like these are significant like events that would affect the global supply chain. And then there's the whole tariff situation, which we can talk about. It could take the entire hour to talk about it, but in essence, I guess the high level here for the tariffs is that largely the tariffs have been utilized as a way to mitigate geopolitical risks, and to try to force some supply chain changes so that the U.S. could become more competitive in some key items like steel and aluminum that relates back to defense, aerospace, medical devices, rare earths, manufacturing. If you don't have these types of capabilities, you can't survive. Of course, it's not all related to that, and there's a lot of emotion and chaos going on with relation to the whole tariff situation. We'll talk a little bit about the deals, but there is some, it's something else that you have to plan for, right? Because if tariffs is just yet another event when you look at it from a supply chain point of view. So you have to think through that, and or trade deals, because we have a lot of trade deals now coming into fruition and investments going on that we might be able to take advantage of. So I think this is the last critical issue here is talent and skills gap is certainly not the least, because I believe in people as our number one asset, but people, process, technologies. Nevertheless, people is definitely changing. So we have to be much more nimble than what we've been in the last 30 years. So AI is transforming supply chains. So we're not going to stop it. It's kind of like saying, I want to continue to drive in my horse and buggy, darn it. It's not going to happen. So basically, we have to be thinking about this. We could get into this. This could be another hour-long topic. But one thing I will say is that it's going to require more high-skilled people than ever before. It's going to change everyone's job. It will provide vast opportunities from a career standpoint for those people who are willing to continually learn. And companies have got to start thinking about the fact that they cannot just eliminate all the lower skilled jobs that are entry level because how will they train the next set of people who can like look at AI engines? So you're going to have to be thinking a little more creatively. But nevertheless, AI is transforming supply chains. We did offshore talent when we moved we moved a significant portion of manufacturing to like China as an example. So you don't just like go, let's say you have, like it's shipbuilding is a great example. We build like less than 5 ships a year now. It's ridiculous. And that if you go from like 2 ships or something to 100% improvement sounds fabulous. It is not fabulous. So we need a massive scale of improvement. So that's where you have to like think differently to find a way to increase your manufacturing and technical talent. And then there's the generational shift, because there's a definite change with the baby boomers as the largest generation retiring, taking skills with them. Just got off a call with one of those people that just retired. And of course, the numbers for inventory came out looking strange the next month. And so we were like going through that to try to provide some feedback to get the clients, on a better plane. But that's like a minor example, but that's like what's happening here. So, we are underappreciating what experience might be leaving in a overview type of standpoint. Now, on the positive side, there's like significant amounts of investments going on. I mean, $15 trillion is something that none of us can probably even fathom what that really means, but it's a significant amount of manufacturing, mining, shipbuilding, data centers, computer chips, energy, because it's got to relate to all of that, infrastructure. As I said, all of this is needed to just support manufacturing. Pharmaceutical, medical products, it's a lot of investment. So that comes with vast opportunity for people who will think a little creatively, and it also comes with vast risk for those who want to keep things exactly as they are, because they're not going to be that way. And then there's been some massive trade deals, which relates to some of these investments. But the EU, for example, is going to, some of it provides access to additional markets so that we could be selling to some of these other countries with some of our products. And some of it relates to, like, for example, Japan is giving us access to funds so that we can invest in things like rare earths, which is great. But they also have some expertise, which goes along with that. South Korea is good at building ships, as I just said. Building 1 or 2 ships a year, which I think is around what it is unacceptable. So we have to be able to support ourselves. So they're investing in in shipyards, as well as manufacturing, as well as providing expertise. Thailand, the reason I called that one out is it related to rare earths as well, which is a good thing. And then there's smart manufacturing and supply chains. There's a lot of investments going on overall in industrial automation, defense tech, AI-powered factories, and the future. So as we think forward here, what's really going to go on? Part of this is like a quandary, because we have, we had experienced several years of crazy inflation that was like hard to absorb, to be sure, from a business standpoint. The prices kept going up and up and up and up, and seemed to be no end in sight. And so that has impact. Manufacturing overall has been in a recession in the US for over 1.5 years. So that's problematic, and it might make us think that our demand is soft, which it is right now. However, there's these $15 trillion of investments coming. So when is all this going to turn around, and like how do we avoid becoming like going from boom to bust, and like both are bad? Because if you go from, in this case, bust to boom, then can you keep up? Can you go from producing one thing or nothing to millions? No, you cannot. And the Newton's law also says an object in motion, stays in motion, and an object at rest, if we decide to rest, stays at rest. It does not start like gaining momentum very quickly. So nevertheless, there's three key levers that I think are going to come to fruition in, well, the first quarter, but more likely the second quarter of 2026. It depends on the lead times associated with the products at your companies. But basically, the first one is our ability to compete, right? So no one was going to move forward if we were going to become completely uncompetitive. So the tax rates were set in, I think it was 2017, if I'm not mistaken. And they were much more competitive with the world. However, they were set to expire at the end of this year, which would make us, completely uncompetitive. So if you were going to be thinking about manufacturing, you would have to think about moving your manufacturing to somewhere else in the world because it just simply could not compete tax-wise. Now that tax extension has been passed. So that's a good thing. It means that we now can secure our current tax rates, which are at least competitive with the world, and in some cases, in many cases better than like other places in the world from a business standpoint, both big businesses and small businesses. It also has provided some additional incentives, such as it's encouraging investments like R&D. It encourages like building of buildings and equipment. So it allows you to expense things that you couldn't expense before. So in essence, and it also is like encouraging for energy and deregulation, right? Of course, it depends on what view you're looking at all this from, but I'm just talking about from a manufacturing supply chain point of view in this conversation. So from that point of view, it's attractive. So it was like the first lever in helping customers feel more secure to start placing orders. However, there were still two other things that were a problem. So one was the tariffs, although most of them were put in place to try to stimulate the right types of activity to mitigate risk. It did not mean that they didn't come with increased, instability and some increased prices. Not necessarily inflation, because inflation means the price keeps going up at X percent. Tariffs like add something to the price and then it stays at that price, but it does add to the price up front, and if you're adding a tariff. So nevertheless, the tariffs provided instability. And then, of course, before, most of the trade deals have been finalized, there's still a few outstanding. Until people knew and business executives knew what was going to be happening and they could predict it, they weren't going to move forward. So like customer orders lagged. Now, we're getting to the point now where the companies that'll thrive long-term and are willing to take a little risk are perfectly, like they understand the arrangement, because basically we have enough trade deals in place and you pretty much would have to have your head under a rock not to know or be able to figure out what the agreements will be with the rest of the countries or what the situation will become, right? It's generally speaking, you can figure it out. So, it's largely stabilized. However, like for example, if you're doing business with Canada, there's still companies that are like saying, well, I'm going to hold off because I'm not totally sure exactly where it's going to end up. Although we still have USMCA in effect. And so it's not going to relate to that. It just relates to things excluded from the USMCA. And Canada, the US, and Mexico are going to, we are moving towards regional supply chains. So I think that we're going to be, I'm quite confident that'll turn out well over the long run for our collective, if you look at it from a collective standpoint. So nevertheless, tariffs have largely leveled out and business confidence was actually on the rise. It was doing quite well until the government shutdown. There's always going to be some problem going on here. So don't know, but it seems like generally speaking, things are stabilizing, and that's what business executives need. So the government shutdown has ended, and we're seeing additional announcements of trade deals, like with Latin America, as well as with additional investments into the US. So it's overall stabilizing. You're never going to get a stabilized, 100% stabilized in the future, because the future is all about disruption, because there's no way you move from a global supply chain with as much risk as we've added into this situation to 100% stability, because it's just not going to happen. But it's getting better. And then the last thing is still a problem, and that's the cost of capital, because the interest rates have just gone up so dramatically that, like the large equipment purchases, for example, like companies simply can't afford to take out additional money with the interest rate, so they're making smaller purchases. The good news is that what we're starting to see is, with number 1 and number 2 coming into place and number 3 starting to go down, we're starting to see that the clients of ours that have smaller customers, like owner operators, they are seeing quotes coming in the future. The ones that are larger, like the large companies, are starting to place some small orders, but they're also like holding off for additional interest rate reductions. So these 3 levers are what's going to impact us, and my forecast is that it'll be in the second quarter of 2026, and we will go from bust to boom. And then the question is, how do we do that? So post-COVID, we obviously figured out we needed to be more resilient and efficient, right? Because pre-COVID, we were all about efficiency, cost savings. Like, the reason we outsourced everything is because we were thinking about labor costs at the time. Of course, labor costs in most businesses is not like the biggest cost driver. It's generally, material costs, transportation costs, especially with the cost of energy. Depends on the products you're talking about. And if you're talking custom products, commodity products, there's a lot of considerations. But pre-COVID, it was all about efficiency. Post-COVID, we realized we have to be resilient as well as maintaining our efficiencies, because nobody wants to reduce their EBITDA. So we have to shore up the basics. I mean, it sounds like common sense. However, I tell you what, with as many people retiring as happening, the basics are falling apart. So you've got to be careful what you're doing with the basics. And now, from a specific situation of resiliency and efficiency related to post-COVID, of course, backups, diversifying risk are some of the basics, but just basics overall. Inventory sounds easy. You'd be surprised the things that we find that go awry with basics lately. So move towards a regional supply chain. We've realized there's a lot of risk, and there's a lot of roadblocks and bottlenecks and potential threats throughout the world. So generally speaking, we're moving more towards a regional supply chain. The good news is that Mexico has achieved scale in manufacturing. The US, even though we've lost a lot of manufacturing, we do have the ability to scale. Not like China, because they have dominated, but between Mexico and the US, there is quite a bit of scale. So we're moving towards a regional supply chain, and Canada does have access to natural resources. And, of course, they manufacture as well, to a lesser degree. But we need to be moving, and Latin America has potential, quite a bit of potential, with several manufacturing sectors. So we're moving towards regional supply chains. We're also moving towards vertical integration, if you can believe it. Meaning like you produce your own equipment, you use the equipment to produce products, you do everything, and vertically integrated. I actually had a client who used that as a tactic 10 years ago, and they were very successful, surprisingly, in a high cost state. But nevertheless, it hasn't been popular, but it's gaining huge popularity. Because if you can better control your supply chain, that is one way to do it. Now, can we all vertically integrate and quickly? No, obviously not. So partnerships is like a strategic win-win-win type partnerships with vertical integration is really what's taken off. And that's with countries, companies combined, and some unique ones with competitors. So we really got to think about that a little differently. And then we need to leverage our advanced technologies. As I said, modern ERP systems is a basic. Lots of people. I mean, every single client, every single one. We can provide vast value and return on investment simply by helping them better utilize their ERP system for, of course, for the processes that'll provide value and customer value and, to their bottom line. But anyway, ERP, robotics, automation, additive manufacturing, we could go on, and there is a page about AI coming up. But that's like just resilience and efficiency. Although that's been a huge feat and we can all pat ourselves on the back for sure, it isn't enough. We are at a fork in the road and we have to scale. As I said, you can't go from 1 to 2. You have to go from 1 to 1,000 or 1 to 10,000. You got to scale and look forward. So we start with talent. As I said, talent is our number one asset. So we no longer can think about it like we used to. For the last 20 years, we've been able to hire talents. If you're good, you pay the money, you can hire the talent. Not that you can't hire talent, but it's really just not going to suffice. You have to build talents because like a lot of the talent is like retired or gone or changed careers or done something. So we have to build talents. We have to think about training and development programs. We have to look at out-of-the-box ideas, strategic, collaborative partnerships, public, private. People are vertically integrating the building of talent. There's a lot of like interesting stories actually. And there's I do a video series of Supply Chain Bites, and I did one about an AI-enabled factory that they're literally building talent that can do AI type manufacturing in a short time scale. So that's the model, if you will. Engaging talent, and of course, I mean, it sounds like common sense things, but every client can use to better engage talent. There's some crazy statistics out there about that topic as to how poor a job most companies do. And then value and retain. I've been talking about this for 30 years, and I'm glad that it's, finally becoming, something that someone, people other than me are saying. But we definitely, really, I'd say 90% of every client has a hidden asset. Somebody that knows exactly what to do. Maybe they've done it somewhere in the past, but like that leader at the time said, no, we can't do that, or we can't do this, or, like there's this problem or that problem. But basically, we always find there's hidden talent at organizations, and it's just getting ideas from them and then helping to put those in place, utilizing multiple ideas, best practices learned along the way from other clients and putting it together. So find your hidden talents. Would be a great place to start. We have to be customer focused. There's a lot going on with supply chain visibility these days. It's crazy. Like you can actually know where exactly your container ship is, if it's been offloaded. There's they use GPS, they use geofencing. It's like amazing. Now, of course, it depends like what you're willing to pay for, but simple common sense of getting on the phone and at least figuring out where statuses are, incorporating some simple basics into your system so that you can track orders is something that's been quite popular lately, and it doesn't require huge investments in IT or any investments really. We've been able to put in some common sense thinking with whatever tools and systems they have, and that's significant. So APS is basically advanced planning, so you can look at different situations and scenario type planning, transportation planning. That's what APS and TMS means. ETA is available or estimated time of arrival. So execution must be a priority. Again, like this, I would consider this another basic that's missing in a lot of cases. But you have to slash the assumptions, and you have to look at talent, advanced processes, and technologies. We'll talk a little bit more about some of those. And you really need to be focused on speed and scale. Continuous improvement is good, but it's not going to get you where you need to go. It's kind of like going from 1 to 2. Don't stop doing it. Of course, you do need to increase your, your skills, your capacity by 100%. That sounds great. but it's not going to be enough. So we have to, think about things differently, make a sharp right turn, as my consulting mentors talks about it. And then PSYOP is a particular specialty in our consulting practice because it's really predictive and transformative to supply chains. If you do it right, it's not a same methodology for every single situation. But what it is sales, inventory, and operations planning. But what it really means is how do we get to the point where we can predict our revenue and our, sales forecast, if you will, but with changing business conditions, it depends. If you're on the consumer side, there's like promotions and all these, trends that you have to keep track of. AI does a much better job of doing a lot of that. And if you're on the custom manufacturing side, most custom manufacturers tell us like, well, we can't do that because we haven't engineered our product yet. But in every situation, we found a way to be able to get more predictive, which frees up everything to speeding it up, make more visibility and bottom line results. So that's it's well worth pursuing. It allows you to, basically it's what else could you ask for, right? But I mean, it's customer value, profitability, and cash flow. With that said, what is it really? You're looking at how do you predict demand, and then in essence, how do you best fulfill that demand? How do you figure out if you have multiple facilities, how do you allocate it so that you optimize what you're doing? How do you look at scenario planning? There are some softwares out there that crowdsource what disruptions are likely. I mean, you can go to extreme degrees. Obviously, what I would recommend is that take a more common sense viewpoint. You have to be looking at some of what's the leading edge processes and technologies, but you don't need to implement them all. You need to implement the ones that are going to be adding value to your bottom line. But there is no company that can't benefit from at least going forward and with a PSYOP process, because it gets you in front of what's going on so that you can do something about all these situations. And it gives you some, resiliency and ability to scale. So there's a complimentary ebook here that if you're interested in downloading it to learn more. Now, AI and advanced technologies is the other hot topic. And we'll get to some questions next year. There's also a complimentary ebook that with a lot of experts, and including myself. Well, I'm the one who compiled it, but and added context. But in essence, is how AI and advanced technologies are going to power smart supply chains and smarter decisions. Feel free to download that. But in essence, there's AI with PSYOP, as I described some of the PSYOP pieces, like AI is behind advanced planning and scheduling, so that you can, like I said, you can look at changing situations. You can use digital twins even, which kind of gives you a virtual simulation with predictive insights to change your plans. And that's not just for PSYOP, but throughout for each piece, right? Could be used in warehousing. I mean, there's a use across the end-to-end supply chain. And then there's other AI enabled factories and smart supply chains are becoming the norm. So like I said, don't have to go forward with every single new technology, shiny new object. But what you need to do is figure out which ones are going to be relevant to your situation. And none of them is not an answer either, because that will just, if you aren't growing, you are declining. As I said about the object in motion, it's the same here. So basically you have to be moving forward. If you aren't moving forward, you are moving backward. You just can't stay still. And then there's a dynamically optimized and predictive insights. So, there's a lot this is another hour that we could talk about AI and advanced technologies and how do you utilize them, but I'll answer your questions and instead. So before we do that though, the last topic is, what does all this mean? As I said, I believe that we're going to go to a significant boom in manufacturing, at least in specific industries as well. So you have to be a bit more creative, thinking about product design. But anyway, we're going to go to a boom. There's a boom of opportunities, we'll put it that way. And so are we going to really be facing headwinds or opportunities? Because like a lot of debate goes on about this. And what I would tell you is that I think probably in history, but the only other time that was significant was during the Great Depression, which I don't expect to happen, but it's a good example. During the Great Depression, there was more companies that shot to the top of their market and stayed there for decades than at any other time in history, because they looked forward and did some smart investments and they set themselves up for success. So I think that the next few years are going to be similar in nature, not because of the Great Depression, but because there's so much change in the global supply chain. It'll lead to vast opportunities for those that are ready to take them on, scale, can see them, knows what to do, are thinking ahead. You have to be utilizing some of these automation, advanced technologies, etc. If you're willing to take them on, you'll have more opportunity than you know what to do with, and you can choose them. On the other hand, this is also like different from the last 20 years, but those people who want to stay still are going to be absorbed by someone else, or they'll just wind down operations because they're going to retire, or they're going to go out of business, unfortunately. So, but it's unfortunately, there isn't going to be much of a middle ground here. It's going to be you take advantage of the opportunities or you don't. But the good news here is that more than any other time in history, other than perhaps during the Great Depression, there'll be more of an opportunity for us all to be successful as, companies and individuals. Because if you're like, continually learning all the different skills, you can deploy them to take advantage of opportunities along the way. So I have also listed here, I'm happy to, and I'll answer some questions. I think we have some, and then also feel free to reach out if we don't get to all of them.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Lisa, for that excellent presentation. We do have a few questions rolling in, and we do have some time before we wrap things up today. Kelvin wants to know, in your opinion, are there any government programs that could assist with the resiliency in the supply chain?
Well, they definitely are. Yes, they definitely are rolling out. Like I mentioned that tax act, which was called it's called a lot of things, but nevertheless, the tax law that was passed has a lot of benefits for manufacturers that will help you build some resiliency, because it's like investment in equipment, investment in technologies. Like a lot of that is part of what's going to help you build resiliency. And then the government does have some programs related to, like, for example, I think the Export Council, but I think that there's also something where the Small Business Administration for sure has several programs for manufacturers that help build resiliency. So I would look at the Small Business Administration and also the tax law, and there's some others, but I would start there, and export is another option.
Awesome. We also have Len, who has been very interactive in the chat. So his first question that he has, PSYOP and its many other formats has been around for nearly 30 years, yet companies still are not doing it with great success. What is holding them back?
That's a really good question, I would say. So since it's a specialty of ours, what I would tell you is that we find that you're right. It's like, to some degree, a lot of these concepts have been around forever and people just don't do them effectively. But it's partly because they get overloaded they think it's a fad instead of a change in process. That's one thing. Another thing is they get overloaded in data. They think it's all about making the perfect forecast from a data point of view. Data is very relevant to it all. We always get involved with the client's data, but it's not the data. I mean, it's understanding the data and thinking about it directionally correct. Like I couldn't tell you the number of clients that get like crazy about perfection. Well,
Mhm.
if you wait for perfection, you are never going to achieve success. So it's sort of like directionally correct is the other thing I would say. That's like a very common phrase I use. Clients get tired of me saying it, but you have to be directionally correct, not perfect, is another piece. And then you really just have to like get all the right people on the page, the
Mhm.
demand and supply people, and combined with the process. A lot of people want to be successful. They just don't know how. So it's combining the people and the process with the use of technology. I mean, to some degree, that's like uncommon common sense, but those are
Right.
the three things I'd say.
Okay, gotcha. Len also wants to know when it comes to AI, how will we be able to find middle managers with 3 to 5 years of experience if we have automated the first 2 to 3 years of jobs?
Well, that is exactly my point. I think that the companies that are successful with opportunities are going to stop. I know some of them, like the big ones, aren't saying this, but they obviously seem to be not hiring entry level computer programmers, including like my nephew who has like that skill set and he's interested in analytics. But luckily he at least found a job in the interim. But nevertheless, I would say that the companies of the future are going to think about training and development differently. And what that means is they'll hire people not necessarily like for the specific degree per se, but they're going to hire enough smart, hardworking, entry level people, and then they're going to put them through that can think and are willing to, are willing to, take the extra action, if you will. And they're going to put them through like a training process because you aren't going to create people who know how to handle AI if you never had any experience to begin with, and
Right.
those people will retire. So I think you're absolutely right, and there are some companies that are doing it but not enough. So like it's one of the topics that I've been talking more and more about because they'll have to start doing that.
Gotcha. And looks like the last one coming in from Len. He wants to know how we can get skills and competences to staff supply chain in the United States. And I believe the reason he's saying this is because the present politically charged environment, obviously things are backed either by one political party or the other who's ever in charge at the time. But so how do you get the skills and competences into the supply chain with so many things being politically charged?
Yeah, I think that you take advantage of like I mean, like for example, when Biden was in office, he was providing incentives like for computer chips, if you will. And so you take advantage of what is available currently. From a manufacturing point of view, there are a lot of things available that weren't available before. So take advantage of them while you can, because they can get you started. And as I said, momentum creates momentum. So no matter what happens next, if you have momentum and you can build some skills, you can carry on programs without having to, have as much backing is what I would say. Because it just depends. Like you said, it's difficult because each party has like a, different set of ideas. But either way, is what's clear is we're gonna need more talent and more high skilled talent. So I would also say start training up all of your people. It's like it does cost something,
Mm.
but the only successful companies are going to be the ones that like um, build skills on people
Mhm.
from the start, and they also retain them though, because you don't want to just like give them all away.
Gotcha. And it looks like Belinda wants to know if you have any recommendation for special courses for supply chain professionals to take on AI.
On AI, well, that's an interesting topic because I was going to tell you, like, for the basics of supply chain and, like, in a general sense, I think the Association of Supply Chain Management, which is formerly known as APICS, APICS, has some really great foundational topics. From an AI standpoint, I think that it's still vetting itself out. There's so many different options out there. And what I would tell you, though, is that if you're working at a company, let's say, And most of the modern ERP systems have some AI type capabilities in them. So to some degree, it depends on your situation. Because if you're utilizing like SAP, Oracle, Microsoft Dynamics, Epicor, like a lot of the bigger names, they're going to have some AI capabilities and some education. So that might be a good place to start where you can like get familiar. And then you also, I mean, actually, there's quite a bit on YouTube. It's figuring out which ones are the best. I would say read that AI book, that the ebook that I complimentary one that I talked about earlier, because that'll get you started with some folks that you can like look at their sites for additional information as well.
Awesome. And we'll be sure to get those links and send them in the post-event email as well for everyone in attendance. So with that, Lisa, thank you so much for all of your time and expertise today. We would like to thank our webinar series sponsors for 2025 as Kennametal. And also we have today's webinar sponsor, SMW Autoblock. And obviously, massive thank you to Lisa Anderson and the entire team at LMA Consulting Group. Thank you so much. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
I enjoyed it as well. Thank you.
Right. You can listen to all of our episodes of Manufacturing Matters and Lunch and Learn podcast from the MFG Radio Network on Spotify, Apple Music, and on our websites, todaysmedicaldevelopments.com, aerospacemanufacturinganddesign.com, defenseandmunitions.com, and evdesignandmanufacturing.com.